This is Real Talk, the customer insights show with Jenn Vogel, a top-rated live stream and podcast in the market research and insights industry. We stream live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, and you can listen on all major podcast channels. Join Jenn and her guests for a weekly discussion around topics that will help you understand your customers better. Real Talk is presented to you by VoxPopMe, the leader in video research and ranked number 1 in qualitative research by Grit 2 years running. Here's today's conversation.
Hello, Real Talk listeners. I'm your host, Jenn Vogel, and today I'm talking to a content thought leader who tweeted how to fail at marketing. Deciding to know what your audience wants without talking to them. I couldn't agree more. Ashley Cummings is a content expert that writes content for e-commerce and marketing and advertising and is joining me on today's episode. Welcome to the show, Ashley.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. I'm sorry, I just totally butchered your tweet. I read it a million times.
You're totally fine.
In the moment, could not find my words, but I loved that tweet as, you know, a marketer who cares a lot about customer insight. And so I'm curious, you posted that message a few months ago. It was widely shared. What prompted you to send that note?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I work in content marketing. And I'll have a lot of clients, a lot of different companies come to me, and a lot of times they want to dive right into just creating their marketing materials, but they haven't done the preliminary work, meaning they haven't talked to their audience in detail. They haven't created a strategy around who their audience is and who they're really wanting to reach. So from a content marketing perspective, as you know, the world is super saturated with content. And if you want to stand out, you really have to know exactly who you're talking to. You have to know, who your audience is, what they like, the things they pay attention to, what their demographics are, behavioral attributes, a tone that will resonate with them, all sorts of different things. So really for me, creating content that really hits the mark, it has to start with knowing who your audience is and then being able to speak to them. For what I do, if they haven't done that first step, then I usually kind of send them back to the drawing board to start, and then have them start with that audience research part. And then, in fact, actually, in my content brief, every time I work on a project, I start with a content brief, and one of my first questions is tell me about your audience. I want to know who they are, what the audience expertise is in a specific topic, and then once I know that information, it tells me how I should craft the piece so it'll really hit the mark and get the traction that it needs to for the client.
Yeah, absolutely. I it's so interesting to me that it's very often not the first step for a lot of companies.
Right.
Do you see that coming up a lot? Why do you think that is, that we're just not thinking about the audience before jumping right into the doing?
Right. So I think there's a couple reasons for that. So I guess to answer your first question, do I see a lot of companies do that? I would say I write for kind of sometimes I write for very, very big SaaS companies. I'll write for Shopify or Salesforce or something like that. And they usually have a very, very, very good process. They have they have their audience defined. They know exactly who they're talking to for their different blogs and whatnot. But I also will work with some smaller SaaS startup companies, and it's usually the smaller startups that they're kind of getting their footing. They're not really sure who they are yet or who they want to talk to, and it's usually those smaller startups that aren't talking to their audience. And then sometimes just kind of medium-sized companies. But I think that the main reason, I think that audience research sounds a lot scarier than it is. And I think that there used to be a lot less tools to help with audience research. And so I think that people, maybe they don't really understand that the scope of it isn't as big as they think it is. Some people might not know that you're supposed to talk to your audience. They might really not understand how important it is really to, instead of using your ideas or what you think will hit an audience, to actually go down and talk to the audience. So I think there can be a lot of different reasons, but I think those are probably the main ones.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting too. I mean, the bigger, AKA like very successful companies have been talking to their consumers and they have really smart segmentations in place. And
Right,
that's, maybe a little bit chicken and egg, right? Like some of these really successful companies, that's why they're so successful is because they've been so
right,
good at understanding their audience from the get-go.
right, for sure.
And so when you work with some of those, I'm curious now about like the bigger companies, do they tend to go more niche? Do they have a lot of different segments that they're speaking to in different ways? Or are they, I think that's always the question,
Hmm.
like how broad do you go, especially as a startup, right? Like, do you build
Right.
something and market something that everybody can benefit from? Or do you really like, to use that quoted cliche, who I can't remember who originally said it, but nail the niche, right? Like get
Right.
that really small market or small segment really right.
Yeah, I think it depends on on your company, on what your product is, what you're marketing and who you're marketing to. Some of the bigger SaaS companies, I mean, they definitely have lots of different niches they reach. Like for I mean, if you take Shopify, for example, they have the merchant that they talk to, and then they have like a larger enterprise that they would talk to that might use their software, and then they also have like a partner program. So for them, they have different, I guess, different audiences, different customer profiles that they talk to, and then they have um, their audience in each one of those different niches built out. But again, that's a bigger company that's running on a much larger scale. For smaller companies, I would say the best thing to do is to niche down into. I mean, I guess it really depends. It always depends in marketing, right?
Yeah.
But if you're niching down and you're really driving into to getting that, who your audience is, who your customers are, and nailing that first, then it's going to inform the rest of your business decisions, and it's definitely going to inform the rest of your marketing decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that once companies kind of get over that mental block of like audience research is hard, which as you know, it's not as hard as everybody thinks it is, as you mentioned. Once you get past that, why do companies struggle to actually talk to their audience? What are the biggest barriers that companies are coming up against?
I think that maybe lack of experience or lack of expertise. They might not know how to start. They might not know kind of what's involved in the process. And I think that's probably the biggest thing. As I mentioned before, I think that a lot of people might think that it's harder and more expensive than they're planning on. And I mean, it does require some resources. So I think that some people also might just not have the resources, and they might not know how to scale once they get in and do the initial work. They might not know how to scale it from there. But yeah, I think that the main things would probably just be the lack of expertise um, in audience research and market research.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I mean, we work with a lot of insights professionals and market researchers who, that is their expertise. And so oftentimes in marketing, there is that kind of fear of like, well, this is a specialty, right? Like, I don't necessarily know how to do it. Um,
Right.
but as you mentioned, there's so many great tools and technologies and resources out there, and certainly a lot more conversation I've seen about this recently in the marketing
Hmm.
community than there ever used to be, which
Right.
I think is really exciting. Have you seen that too? Like more
Yeah.
conversation recently?
I've seen a lot. I mean, a ton more conversations, and I think that goes back to the idea that there's so much marketing. There's so many more brands now. There's so many more companies. There's just like so many more marketing materials out there. And really, like if you're gonna create content, if whether it be like TikTok content or long form content like I write, or really anything, if you're gonna hit that and you're that and make content that really just like hits your audience, you really have to know like who you're talking to. And so yeah, in the marketing community, I've seen a lot more people for sure just like focus in and talk about like what tools you can use and how you can really get to know your audience and what they want so that they'll pay attention to you in this like crazy digital world.
I know, right? It's
Yeah.
even more and more saturated.
Right, right.
I think too, one of the other barriers is the time, right? Especially like
Right.
being a startup marketer myself, like there is so much pressure to move quickly in startup
Right.
world, right? Like get it out there. When are we launching? What's the go to market,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think everybody is under a lot of pressure to, you don't have time. You don't have time to talk to the audience because we got to get this out there. To who? I don't
For
know.
sure.
Or what do you say? I
Right.
don't know. But
Right.
that time pressure is huge too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. And it's easy to, I mean, to rush to things that you might not think are as important or that might not fall within your expertise or your responsibilities. So yeah, I think that's absolutely true.
Yeah. Now, what are some of the tactics that you recommend for having better conversations with consumers? What are some of the strategies and techniques that have worked for you?
Yeah, so for me, I think that there's three main things. And the first one, I had interviewed um, one of the CEOs of Carson Doyle. They're like a TikTok agency,
Hmm.
and their agency is pretty cool. They're actually only made up of Gen Z employees, and so the CEOs are Gen Z, like all the workers are. They just have this like really young, hip crowd. But so I was interviewing him, and one of the things that he said that, well, he talked about how Gen Z on TikTok especially like really value authenticity, and that's like super important for their brands and their clients to communicate in their ads. Even though they're doing ads for these different companies, they want them to be authentic. So for him, he said that he starts every campaign with just like organic conversations with exactly who they want to talk to, which I think that goes back to just it's not maybe as difficult as you think it might be to do some of this research, but he'll start out and he'll just like hop on the phone call with like an ideal customer, and he'll just like talk to them like, what do you want to see, what are you interested in, what TikTok videos are hitting, what are interesting for you right now. And I think that's like a really good way, especially if you're a smaller brand, to go about it. Just like hop on with people who are showing loyalty and be like, hey, what are we doing right? What kind of content are you reading? What kind of content are you consuming? What's interesting to you? Stuff like that. And really just gathering that qualitative data, just, straight from your customers. I think like first and foremost, that's the best way to go. Um, the second thing that I would suggest is participating or setting up some type of online community, and there's like a lot of different ways to do this, and it also kind of depends on who your audience is, but if you can set up an online community where your customers are going in, and they're talking to each other, and whatever, they might be reviewing your products or just talking about their interests. That's a great way to just you can capture ongoing information and ongoing data and ongoing customer sentiment about you know whatever information that you might need about your audience will be happening in those communities. And there's a lot of tools to do that. You can use social media for that. There's actual market research tools, things like Fuel Cycle, stuff like that, um, are great ways to capture that information. And then um, and then the third thing that I would suggest is there's a lot of audience research tools. And I think this probably goes back to what you were saying earlier too, about just like a lot of marketers talking about this idea. But there's a lot of tools that you can use to kind of analyze data, to learn and find out where your audience is, what like podcasts they listen to, what influencers they like, who they follow on Twitter, just kind of like who your ideal customer profile is based on like what they're doing in the social world. And one tool that I like, every once in a while, I don't do like audience research for my customers very often, but sometimes I'll do it like for myself. But Spark Toro is actually a good tool to help you identify your audience and what they like and who they're listening to. So once you've gathered that information, you can kind of go from there and start creating marketing materials. So those are probably the three tactics that I would recommend starting with, especially if you are a content marketer.
Yeah. I mean, and all of those things you mentioned are like fairly scrappy, don't require a lot of,
Right.
a lot of skill or expertise to do. I mean, get on the phone and have conversations with people. Sometimes it can be hard to find them if you don't have your own audience already, if you're
Right.
a really early stage startup, but LinkedIn is
Mhm.
great for that, for finding people. And, you can always find somebody who's willing to get on the phone with you. Our friends at Fuel Cycle will be so excited that you shouted them out. They're a great partner of ours, good friends.
Oh,
And
awesome.
yeah, I'm a huge fan of SparkToro. I've been using it since day one, and it's so easy to just search
Right.
around keywords and kind of see what kind of content people are consuming and where they are.
Right.
So it helps with that distribution strategy too. Once you've found that voice and that tone and that perfect piece of content, how are you going to get it in front of people, the right people?
Right.
It's so great for that.
For sure. Yeah.
Um,
I love all those tools.
what's that?
No, I love all the tools. I love Fuel Cycle
Yes.
and love SparkToro has a lot of different use cases, so pretty cool.
And they just keep kind of developing new functionality, which is, it's like keeps getting better and better. We have a great episode with Rand Fishkin from about a year ago. If
Ah.
you want to go back and check that out and
Yep,
hear more about
he's the person to talk to for sure about that. I'm just like a
100%.
fangirl. Ooh, love the tools.
I think we all are, right?
Right.
So million dollar question. Once you've had those conversations, set up that ongoing community, maybe you're doing some quant surveys or, you're doing that audience research. How do you take what you've learned and make sure that the information is going to get used?
Right. So I think out of all of the things, this is probably the more difficult part because I mean you can learn about your audience all day long, but if don't you don't collate that information together in a way that it is actionable for your content writer to use or your TikTok marketer or whoever's on your team, then it's not going to get you very far. So I think the best thing is to have an insights person on your team if you can afford it or if you can dedicate that position to somebody who's on your team. You need someone who can go in and combine those insights together and then use them to inform goal setting, customer profiles, strategy, just bringing in all of that information together and then making sure that you are using that information to inform your decision making. So yeah, I would just make sure that you have one person who's in charge of that, and then that you actually are going back and looking at that information and making sure that the content that you're producing really is resonating and with the information that with the audience and the information about the audience that you have gathered. So yeah, from I think it's another thing. Sorry, lots of ideas in my head, but another thing that's important. I think it's important to remember it's not like a one and done thing, especially right now when there's like so many changes happening with consumers and so many changes happening with technology and just the way that people can consume content and the way that people can purchase. Like trends are really shifting right now in a lot of different ways. So I think it's important to make sure that it's an ongoing conversation. That's another reason why an online community as a tool like Fuel Cycle is so good, because you're not just collecting a survey one time. You're going in and you're seeing what conversations are happening over time, and how your audience is changing. So yeah, I would say those would be the main two things, would be to have someone who can combine those insights together, and then making sure that you're actually looking back to those insights to inform your content, and then also just making sure that you continue to do the research and see how your audience is changing through time, especially as things are changing so much right now.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, people's opinions and behaviors change in like an instant these days.
Right.
So it is so important to keep that research ongoing. And I absolutely love that you've said, really spoken to the importance of an insights role on the team early, right? To
Right.
help to really turn what you've learned into something actionable. There's a lot of conversation over the last, I don't know, 10 years with more and more DIY research tools available, survey tools or, other research platforms that anybody can have access to. There's a lot of conversation in the insights community about democratizing research. And there's a fear associated with allowing marketers to do their own research on their teams or, product functions. But everybody has that same desire to understand the consumer. And I think like for marketers to understand, here's my role, here's how I can contribute and participate in consumer understanding is so great. And then to say, there's so much value also in the insights function and being able to translate, right? To be able to turn those learnings from all those different sources into something that you can actually use in your business strategy. Like that's really, that's a great partnership right there. Because I think there's a lot of fear of there being so much easy to use DIY, go set up a Facebook group and do your own, have your own ongoing conversations. Like, where does that leave insights? And, in your experience, there's still a role for that.
Right. And I think that this becomes even more important too, as marketing becomes more omnichannel, like your teams they have to be talking to each other. Like if you have a content team and then you have a social media team and you have whatever, a direct mail team, I don't know, whatever you have on your team, like customers are everywhere right now and you have to be sending them the same messages. Otherwise it gets really confusing for your brand and for your customers. And so if you do have that one person who can combine the insights together and communicate it to all your different marketing teams, it's going to be a lot more successful than if you just kind of are one person learning this and thinking that that's how you should employ a strategy. So yeah, I think it's critical that you have that.
Yeah, I think you're so right. And that consistency is so important for omnichannel. We had another episode a while ago with a Gen Z expert. And when you were talking about Gen Z really caring about authenticity, it I was like, yes, totally. We were talking about that. And the other thing that came up in that conversation was the expectation of consistent experiences across channels.
Right.
So, if it's retail, if I'm shopping online or shopping through Instagram or TikTok, I want that same experience when I walk into the store. There's got to be some thread of consistency and really having some strategy there on the messaging or what sort of experience you're providing for consumers is so key. And that has to come back to the consumer voice and what the consumers are asking of the brand.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Well, this has been a really great conversation. I guess I would love to hear, do you have any thoughts on, you said this is how to make your marketing fail. Don't talk to your customers, right?
Right.
Have you seen any big duds in terms of campaigns recently?
Oh man, I would have to think if I've seen anything just like, I think that sometimes you see like the big ones, like a Pepsi will have like a total fail or something. I'm trying to think of something that's recent. I'd have to think on that one, but I think that my main
spot.
Oh no, you're totally fine. But I think that my main motivation for the tweet really was from just me as a content marketer, and as a freelance writer. A lot of times that I'll talk to a customer and they're like, we want content, and I'm like, okay, great, who are you talking to? And they're like, and they don't really know. They don't have a content strategy in place. They don't have a style guide in place, and so they're missing some of these preliminary things that you have to know. And all of those things always start with knowing who you want to talk to, what they like, and and then once you have that information, how to say what you want to say. And I think that even you can kind of see this even if you go just different publications that you might read. Some things like have very, very different tones. Something can be very, they can be very professional and very concise. And then you can have something that has like a lot funnier of a tone, or you can have something that's like super authentic, and that's going to reach very, very different audiences. Like, whatever, there's the generic example of like what your grandma watches or how they consume content is going to be very different than like the way an 18-year-old consumes content and vice versa and stuff. So, but it's really true. And once you know like who your audience is and what they like, it's a lot easier to understand tone and the information. And that can extend like even into just like how educated is somebody on this topic. Like if I'm writing, an ebook for a SaaS company, am I writing it for someone who is just starting a merchant account and they're brand new, or am I writing to somebody who has been in the the marketing world for like 7 years or something? Like it's very different, the type of content, the type of research that you include. And so yeah, so for me it's really important that the clients that I work with really know like who their audience is and what their education is, what their their age is. And once I have that information, it's a lot easier for me to come through and create a piece of content that's really going to knock it out of the park versus just being like, oh, I hope they like this.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. Thanks everybody who listened in. We're going to be back with another episode next week when we talk with Mark Schaefer. We'll see you then.